Makerspace video series, 3D printer. Welcome inside the CPC Makerspace. Greg Reed. Behind me I have the 3D printer produced by XYZ Company. Next to it the machine on which the software is loaded. I'm printing an object right now on the 3D printer, and while that's ongoing I'm going to give you an overview of 3D printing, what it is and how helpful it can be and how fun it can be, basically. There's two things that are going on when one 3D prints something. One thing that's happening is plastic filament is being melted inside the 3D printer nozzle, and that's the nozzle right there, and then it's ejected from that nozzle. It gets very hot. It's like 400 degrees Fahrenheit, as it were, so one needs to be careful not to place a finger or something like that underneath the nozzle once it's heated. There's a couple different kinds of filament that are used in 3D printing. Excuse me. This is PLA filament, which is organic. It's plant-based. It has a lower melting point. It expands when it cools. Excuse me. And because it's organic, one can actually use it to make objects to wear on skin, for example, and it won't be bothersome that way. Objects that are more resistant to torquing and stress and that should be made with a different kind of 3D printer filament called ABS. ABS has a higher melting point. It's a tougher material when it dries. ABS is commonly seen within the insides of refrigerators, for example. Legos are made from ABS plastic. Hubcaps on vehicles that are plastic are made usually from ABS compound. It's a plastic compound. So again, what happens inside the 3D printer, one of the principal functions is that filament is taken in by the printer, and in this case it's loaded on a spool on the left-hand side of the 3D printer, and it's fed into the nozzle area, heated in the nozzle area, and then extruded, as it were. That's one of the things that goes on in a 3D print operation. The other thing is that the software for the 3D printer takes a file, a 3D printing file, and it slices it. It slices it horizontally into hundreds, perhaps even thousands of layers. And once that slicing is done within the software, and once the filament inside the 3D printer is sufficiently heated and in liquid form, then the two functions sort of work together to eject melted plastic from the nozzle of the 3D printer into the shape eventually that the software dictates to it. Now, why do they call it 3D printing? It's an interesting analogy with paper printing, as it were. If one looks at a printed page under a microscope from the side, one can see that actually there's layering going on of the ink. The letters are actually very slightly above the page, as it were. There may be some also ink staining happening with that, but 3D printing, again, is taking melted filament and depositing it horizontally, layer by layer. And here you have the extruder, you have a stage underneath that, a metal horizontal stage, and the printer is strategically depositing this melted plastic on the stage, layer by layer, building it up until one has an object like, for example, this cube that was printed layer by layer on a 3D printer. Not that difficult in principle and fun to use. 3D printing is something that's helpful for folks in all walks of life, and it has a very strong application industrially as well. CPC Library has more 3D printers on the way. There are supplementary help guides available. Eventually the CPC Makerspace will have open hours in which students can walk in without appointment and be able to use these items of equipment, including the 3D printer. Staffing will be here for students to consult and in best practices and sort of getting over the hump and using something like a 3D printer for the first time. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing folks inside using the CPC Makerspace.